keep getting on my nerves, and I'm going to give you another kind of house to look after. One with lots of bars in the windows.
Hey! You shut us in!
Satan's all the rage these days. Craig, can you hear me? Sergeant, they're dead people trying to kill me! Ah!
The zombies have arrived from Spain. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, also known by a wealth of other titles. And I'm really looking forward to chatting about that with my awesome panel. Let's bring everybody in. And let's say hello to Christianne Benedict.
Hello.
Dodd Alley.
Thanks for having me.
Darren Callahan.
Great to be back.
And Matthew Amador.
Hey, great to be here, and hopefully, like the movie, I will be overdubbed.
And we are here to chat about Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, celebrating its 50th anniversary, aka, and this is one of my favorite things, is this movie has so many other titles. We have The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, Don't Open the Window, Breakfast at Manchester Morgue, which I always thought was a really interesting one, and The Living Dead. Thank you all for coming on the show and welcome. So as is our tradition, I would love to hear where people came to this film for the first time. It's an unusual zombie film, and yet it feels very familiar in the pantheon of Euro horror, Euro zombies. So let's kick things off with Christianne. Where did you see this film for the first time?
Well, I have a story about that. I first encountered it, sort of a capsule review at the end of William K. Everson's The Classics of the Horror Movie, when I was in junior high school. And he spoke glowingly of it. And he said that, he thought it was better than Night of the Living Dead. He's wrong, but that's a hell of an endorsement. And I just kept a lookout for it for years and years and years after that, but I never found it. It finally came back, and it finally came into like relatively wide print under one of the titles that I recognized. And that's the key here. In the early 2000s from like Anchor Bay under Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. And I queued it up from, I bought it and I queued it up, and about halfway through the first scene, I realized, wait a minute, I've seen this film before. I had seen it when I was running a video store under the title The Living Dead. And I was just furious because I thought, damn, I've been looking for this forever. What the hell?
And yet you had already seen it.
And I had already seen it, yeah.
Did you enjoy it under the Living Dead title?
I don't really remember the experience of watching it very much because I watched it very late at night after I closed the store. I thought the zombie bits were really good. I didn't really come around to the other parts of the film until I was able to sit with it for a while.
Dodd, how about you?
Well, on prior episodes where we talked about the Twilight Zone and Gremlins, I kind of was recycling the same story, which was the kid wandering the video stores, discovering these titles for the first time. Living Dead in Manchester Morgue, it's a little bit different. In the early 2010s, I was reading this book, The Book of the Dead by Jamie Russell. It's a history of zombie cinema. And it spoke glowingly of The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. And I'm going, I've never heard of this movie. Oh my God, I need to go seek this out. So back then, when Netflix DVD by mail was still a thing, I ordered it as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. I saw it for the first time and I loved it. And it ended up being the title I selected for the Hidden Horrors book that you had published a while back.
And it's a wonderful essay. I broke it out. So I was like, oh, and then I realized, oh, wait, Dodd wrote this. So that's funny.
I did too. It had been years since I read it. So I was consulting myself. Like, what did I write again?
What did I have to say? Darren, how about you?
Well, again, I have the Book of the Dead, and there is a great essay on this film in that book. But I actually first even heard the title from Glenn Kaye's Zombie Movies, The Ultimate Guide, another big film compendium that's very popular with the kids. I loved reading about all these European horror films that I had never seen at all. And that one obviously stood out. I love that title. I can understand why they changed it for markets, because Let Sleeping Dogs Lie is a very, colloquial phrase. But Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, great title. The image in the book struck my brain, and I was like, oh, this sounds good. So like Dodd, I found it on Netflix back in the day in the late 2000s when they still had mail by order. And I caught that movie as well as many others, including Tombs of the Blind Dead, other Spanish horror zombie films based on that book. So that shows you the importance of a good film compendium. So go out and buy Horror 101 and Hidden Horror today.
Hey, you know what? I love the fact that we've had 3 origin stories and we've referenced 3 reference books already. So, Matthew, how did you hear about it?
This is actually the first time I've ever seen it.
Oh, wonderful.
I was really looking forward to it to broaden my horizons here a bit. When I'd heard about it first was as an influence for, after Grindhouse, when I saw Grindhouse and they had all the movie trailers, and hearing that, because I thought, the Edgar Wright trailer was just hilarious. I'm like, oh, I get some references that are being made over here. And then when I, went down a Google rabbit hole, I was like, oh, there's some very specific references that I don't get. And this one popped up. So I was really excited to be able to, kind of know what, what compelled him to make this amazing film trailer called Don't.
Yeah. Because it would have been under the Don't Open the Window title.
Yes.
Which is one that doesn't get as much play as the other ones we've referenced, Manchester Morgues and the Sleeping Corpses Lie. I'm pretty confident that John Kitley was responsible for bringing this one into my sphere, because I was in a Italian zombie phase and going through all of those. And John was like, you know what? If you cast your memory back another, decade or so, you're going to come across Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. It does have some ties to the Italian zombie movement because it shares a makeup artist, for one, and the fact that it was shot partially in Rome and in Madrid. So that was my exposure to it, and I was immediately knocked out by it. And when Dodd suggested it as the film he wanted to showcase for Hidden Horror, I was like, absolutely, that one needs more eyes on it. And I'm glad everybody is here to chat about it. One of the things I like about this movie is that it does present, it's kind of like one of the first flesh-eating zombies that isn't George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Like, it's still 6 years later. And the story, as I've heard it, is that Jorge Grau, the director, was approached with the idea of make Night of the Living Dead, but in color. And that's pretty much what this film is. And yet it manages to go and do a few extra things along the way.
I do think of it as its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is Night of the Living Dead in color, and yet it's so much more.
Just curious, Aaron, when you refer to the film, and maybe how you'll post this, what title do you lead with?
I oftentimes will go with Let Sleeping Corpses Lie simply because it's shorter. I don't know how many decades we're into the internet generation, but I still can't type for shit. So the fewer characters I have to tap out, the better. So I'll usually default to Let Sleeping Corpses Lie.
Cool. I do think, for me, that is the coolest of the titles, although Don't Open the Window has some kind of mystique to it. But I really, really dislike The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue for a variety of reasons, plot-wise and title-wise. It's just too long. But I understand.
I don't think they ever make it into Manchester either.
No, they don't.
Right. And they rarely have breakfast. So
yeah.
The breakfast one I love because much like 50 Shades of Grey spun out of Twilight fan fiction, I really, really want this to have spun out of Breakfast at Tiffany's fan fiction. So thank you for that knowledge.
Is that a thing? I would like that to be a thing, but I don't know if is that a thing? Breakfast at Tiffany's fan fiction?
Let's make it a thing.
What do we like about this movie? What is it that kind of makes it special, Darren? I'll pass that off to you since you kind of did highlight the fact that it is its own thing.
I was hanging out with a friend in the mid 2000s, and There Will Be Blood came out. They went to see There Will Be Blood and came and was the first person I knew who saw it in the theater. And I said, how was There Will Be Blood? And the person, his name was Chris. Chris said, when you see a movie and you can just tell like the camera lenses they choose, the aspect ratio, the acting. It just is an Academy Award worthy movie. I felt, not to say these are equivalent movies or all, but when I first saw Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, not even on a Blu-ray, I was like, you know what? This is kind of like that There Will Be Blood comment from Chris. This is like, you see it and you're like, wow, there's people who actually really know what they're doing. Not only with a camera, but they know how to tell a story that makes pretty well cohesive sense. They know how to production design. They know how to plug plot holes, and they know how to introduce something early that pays off later. And just in general, even though it is a low budget international film, it is definitely better than a lot of the stuff I was seeing. And that's what I really liked about it, because it immediately struck me that it was not made by Jess Franco or somebody who's just run and gun. It was somebody who really actually could make a good movie. And that's always impressed me. I always think of this as no matter what your sensibilities are to it, I think of it as quality. And that's why it's always stuck with me.
I'm a big fan of zombie commentary films. I mean, it's the reason I always loved Dawn of the Dead so much, because of its commentary on consumerism. So, I mean, this one, the last time I watched it was before COVID. And then I watched it again this week. And in my opinion, I think it's aged remarkably. In the opening credit sequence, I think I even caught a guy wearing a mask, and that really struck a chord for me. But just the sort of attitudes in regards to the belief and disbelief towards science, you hippies don't know what you're talking about when you're trying to say that the climate's being destroyed. I think it's just that commentary for me that I loved, especially watching it now compared to a few years ago. It just aged really well.
This is okay. You said positive things first. Be clear. This was not the classic that I think I was anticipating it being. I love that it's that for other people. Just didn't live in that place in my heart. One thing that's going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but I really mean it as an actual compliment, is the way that the script frequently, I felt, kind of landed into camp. One of my least favorite genres, I think I've mentioned before on your podcast, is I don't like comedy horror. I can deal with the horror comedy, but once it leads too much into comedy, I'm like, you're just not I feel like you're not embracing the genre. You're kind of looking down at the genre. I say camp because my favorite definition of camp comes from Susan Sontag, who referred to it as failed seriousness. And there are times here where the script, this is 1974, it could have been kicking around for 20 years. This could have been a script from something from 1950 easily. And I was like, oh, and in that way, I'm like, this feels like failed seriousness. However, their earnestness is not in folly. Their earnestness is not, like, you can tell that they want to make something good. They're not just like here just to, like, proof of concept just so I can go do another picture later on. And that's that kind of love that they put into this, that they obviously invested this with the makeup effects, with some of the shots where I'm like, you know what you're doing. You know how to make a movie. You don't want to do a full body burn? Great. You have these fire effects that are right out of like Frankenstein. I like what you're doing. So even though half of it I felt landed into a little bit of a camp area for me, seeing that they meant well and they did really good with the other half of it, like really just like, honestly, this puts it into a thumbs up category for me, where otherwise it may have just been like in the middle.
You're going to love this film by the end of this panel, Matthew.
I'm waiting. I'm hoping this is going to be like when I turn some people around about Phantasm.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, turn me around, please.
Christiana.
I have a lot of thoughts about this movie. The thing in the forefront for me is how much this seems like a Nigel Neal story. Because it's absolutely sort of a combination of like traditional monsters with sort of a new gloss of science fiction to it. I like the way that it sort of straddles the new horror movies of the early 70s, starting with Night of the Living Dead and things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and that sort of thing, with the Gothic. The background sets and locations are just pure Gothic. I mean, that hospital is like the manor house from a Hammer film. And they wind up in this Gothic crypt, which I presume was a set that was sitting around at the Cinecittà when they were there. The thing that struck me this time through, though, which I hadn't really thought about, is it's a portrait of the ticking time bomb of fascism in the UK that would blossom under Margaret Thatcher. The inspector is the sort of guy that's going to wind up higher up in the government, enforcing, the Thatcherist policies. Now, the last time I watched it, I had just seen a couple of films about the Yorkshire Ripper, Pete Sutcliffe. The thrust of those films was that the Yorkshire Ripper got away with everything that he did because the Yorkshire police were corrupt and incompetent. This film is a portrait of the same thing, because the inspector is absolutely corrupt. He's not going to investigate anything unless it's in his interest to do so, and they're all incompetent. So, and I could hear a line from one of the Red Riding films that says, "This is the North where we do what we want," and that's exactly what those cops are doing. I love films that do this. It encapsulates its entire theme in the opening credit sequence, because you see lots and lots of polluting automobiles sitting in traffic. You see smokestacks spewing pollution from the top of and then you see that that big aerial shot of a nuclear power plant. So you have like all of the ills of human depredation on the environment encapsulated, and then you have this shot of this streaker rather that runs across the street in front of Ray Lovelock, and nobody cares. Everybody is just indifferent to everything, and in their entire, they're all in their own little worlds, which is exactly how this film's plot sort of unfolds. The police are in their own little world. The scientists who are doing the agricultural experiment are in their own little world, and nobody sees anything as a totality.
Thank you, Christianne. That's wonderful, because I was watching the opening credits and I'd forgotten, although I was immediately reminded. I was like, that's right. Like, there's so many lovely layered in messages here, but it's done in a really lovely way that isn't, yes, it's hitting you over the head, but it's hitting you over the head in the right way. It's so that it lands, but then we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to carry on with the story. The idea of the streaker, one of my people that I watched it with, they went, "Oh, everybody's already dead inside." And I went, "Look at you." Yeah, it's that kind of thing where you go, it's low hanging enough, high hanging fruit. It's like you have to actually reach for it, but it's there, and you feel rewarded for having picked up on what the filmmaker's giving you.
If I can add here, this is a bit of a tangent, but it'll be a good one. Don't worry.
I'm never worried about your tangents, Darren.
All right, good. You can cut it if it sucks. So I read a book about producer Trevor Horn, who produced a lot of records in the 80s and was a big deal, including a record for Yes with Owner of a Lonely Heart on it. So he's talking to Yes about Owner of a Lonely Heart, and they had one riff, and that was the whole song. And he basically said, look, to be a good song, you can have one riff. It'll be a good song. It'll be fine. Do you want a good song or do you want a great song? Because a great song takes you on a journey. And in order to take you through on a journey, you need more moments. You need to think of this 4-minute song as a 4-minute film. And if the 4-minute film was just a static picture, it's not a very good film. And he's like pitching how a movie basically can't be about one thing. It has to be about many things. And I've seen this succeed and I've seen it fail. Sometimes people overstuff it and they're going for way more. This film feels like it is on the surface just a gory international zombie film. You can watch it with those eyes and you'll have fun. I think the early part will be a little slow for you and the latter part will be extremely exciting for you, but that doesn't mean I don't like the early part. But if generally that's who you are and that's what you want to see, you're going to get gushes of blood, major siege scenes, all filmed in color, fully realized, very well artistically done. But if you're like, I need more, you've got the obvious first layer, which is environmentalism, going from the awful city to the very pristine country, and then it being corrupted by the experiment that causes zombieism. But there's other things. There's conservatism versus liberal. There's the relationships of the people. There's a theme about drug addiction. There's probably 5 or 6 more baked in there. It really is. It's not too many. So I don't feel like they're really trying too hard, but I do feel that they have a point of view on the world, and this is an opportunity and a vessel to really share it. And they do it well. I never looked at it and went, "Oh, so hokey." We can talk through Matthew's comment about whether it's camp. I think the dubbing probably doesn't help there, but I do think that they were really going for something people could talk about later, and not just, wow, that zombie ate that person really cool, which, I think makes it last.
I think it's worth mentioning that the reason that they had to dub everybody is because the Cinecittà isn't actually insulated for sound because it's by the airport. So everybody who made films there, including Fellini, had to, post dub all their dialogue.
I was curious. I love Christine Balbo, who's the female lead named Edna in the picture. Strangely, it's weird. Like, just because of the movies I have like 9 Charlton Heston films. I never think of Charlton Heston as my guy. I never name check him as an actor, but I have a lot of his films. And it's kind of that same way with Christine, because I have House That Screamed, and I have What Have You Done to Solange, which I really enjoy both those films. So with this, these are a great trio for a film fest of her films, and in each movie she's unique and wonderful and beautiful, and I do think she's really talented. But what is her real voice? Because I know none of the voice in these 3 movies is really Christine Galbo. She's Spanish, so like what does she sound like? I've never seen an interview. She's live, but she's totally disappeared off the map. It would be one of those things where it'd be like a Singing in the Rain moment where I'd hear her and it would be just a different voice. I might be like, what the hell's going on? But I do really love her screen presence, and whoever does do her dubbing basically nails it pretty good. So
yeah.
But it's definitely 3 different people.
In terms of hearing her real voice, I don't know, but I think I read somewhere that she retired from acting and became a dance instructor at one point. So we may never know.
In a full circle moment, I would love it if it turns out that she actually overdubbed Charlton Heston.
Oh my God. Yeah, please. That would be awesome. Charlton Heston, he should be in this movie. He could have played the Arthur Kennedy role. I think that would have been amazing. Although Arthur Kennedy really holds his own as the confirmation bias detective.
Oh man. Can we talk about Arthur Kennedy in this movie? Because this is a 5-time Oscar nominee. Like, he is a legit solid actor, but we're getting him toward the end of his career when you could just feel the bitterness coming out of his pores that he's doing this movie, and he just takes it out on Ray Lovelock throughout the entire thing. And I just love it. It is the perfect combination of elements, because Arthur Kennedy, disgruntled Arthur Kennedy, is my favorite Arthur Kennedy.
It feels like Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate, or Gary Oldman and Leon or something. It feels like he's like, I'm going for it. Just as one of those performances. And maybe that's why I like it.
The thing I like about his performance is that, you have certain zombie films where, or even The Walking Dead for that matter, where the zombies so much don't become the villains as much as a human character does. And Arthur Kennedy in this movie really is a rat bastard. Despite these zombies walking around the whole time during this film playing out, I'm going, this is the bad guy. This is the guy that I hate through the duration of this film.
What's weird is he's actually he's investigating it, and he's throwing away theories that don't match his bias, but he is actually conducting an investigation, which I think is sort of strange. He's going towards the satanic panic thing, and there's actually a little bit of evidence for that, going towards the drugs and the photos, and the fact that the wife may have murdered the husband, which causes an early zombie riff. He's not really off base. He's not. And these things are pretty ridiculous. The dead are coming back to life. But what I don't understand is how bad are his listening skills? Like, he just like gets in an argument with everybody about the smallest fraction of elements when he could just maybe have a conversation. Of course, that's not as dramatically interesting. And then Day of the Dead, it proved you could yell the whole movie and no one will care. So maybe he's going for that. I don't know.
This is another one of those films where if actually bothered to listen to the woman at the start of the movie, it would be over in 10 minutes. It's infuriating.
Nobody does. They just, essentially, she's carjacked.
He
essentially
runs over his
carjacking.
motorcycle. Come
He's
on.
fine. I've
He's
had a
fine.
motorcycle, it's
He's in
fine.
the middle of nowhere and he has to get to his house because he's meeting some people to make a sale. And I do feel like there is yes, Christiane. Like, I feel like if they listen to the women, but I don't feel like the women are presented very, very sympathetically in this film. I think they're not shown in their best light.
Her panic at seeing the very first zombie, which I honestly think is the best scene of the movie.
I love that scene. Love that scene.
Her alone waiting by the car in a country field with a river, and the soundtrack and the first appearance of the zombie with the contact lens eyes that are very well done, and the pull out from the back of her red hair with the wind as she notices he's behind her 20-30 feet, and then the suddenness of it is like that opening Night of the Living Dead suddenness of, wow, this became dangerous really fast.
Yeah.
And she has a very natural reaction. She hides in the car. She locks the doors. She runs away, has a horror trope of tripping in the water. But that plays a little bit later when they notice that she's wet. No one knows her. Who knows how sound her judgment is or what she did see. She's a complete stranger to the main male character. And he's a doubting Thomas anyway. But her reaction is actually probably what any woman would have done had somebody just appeared with some menace in their face and attacked their car.
I do like the setup you're talking about there in particular. Just something I noticed about choice of shooting location. It's just so difficult to escape a dangerous situation when instead of a sidewalk, you have to run across stepping stones that go across a waterway. Yeah. I just, something about that touch just made me feel a little tense.
And I love the design of the shot and the colors. Really, really hums on Blu-ray. If you see this on Blu-ray, the excellent, I'll hold it up here. It's pricey. I don't even know if it's still available. This was maybe 5 years ago. The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue edition here is got a steel book that is incredible. And I think I paid $45 for it, which is kind of pricey, but it comes with a Blu-ray DVD, the soundtrack, a booklet, and probably way more than a lot of other big Hollywood movies have ever been offered. And I really think this package is great, but the picture is also great. The sound, not so great, but they admit that in the restoration notes that they could only find a binaural soundtrack. That scene's colors and that scene's clarity, her coat, you can almost see every fiber on her coat. And like I said, those contact lenses don't look like lenses. I'm sure they are, but they look like that person's eyes. Perfect scene and perfectly executed for the first appearance of a threatening zombie in the film.
Well, and we haven't seen something like that before. Most of the time, with contact lenses, we get a completely blacked out eye. So to have a contact lens that also has like a design within it, I don't think I had ever seen that before. And it's not something that gets done very regularly. I think the John Carpenter In the Mouth of Madness, we get something similar with the eyes of the affected there. But I as you said, Darren, like there's just some real clarity to these contact lenses, and the shape, the geometry of it is so striking. And the way this zombie moves is akin to Night of the Living Dead. It's that weird, jerky, aggressive, violent. And even though it feels uncoordinated, it also seems really dangerous. Like this is somebody who can cover ground. And when they reach at you, you're gonna feel it.
But, I think the contact lenses are cool too, because they could have chosen black eyes or different designs. There could have been many things, but I noticed it for the first time. I saw it in the theater and before this podcast, and I noticed how many circles happen in it. Now, granted, that is also an indicator of the sonic waves of radiation that are causing the lesser nervous systems to come back to life or become angry. But like if you look at the opening credits with those round green circles, it's Earth-like. This goes into the ecological message that we've got this round sort of enveloping sort of Earth-like thing. So when you see the contact lenses also round, it looks like the Earth destroyed by fire or nuclear energy or something. I feel like they made a choice that these will be a reflection of a dead world, where all the other circle metaphors you're seeing throughout the film, which I really picked up on this time, that must be the living world. So again, They really drive their themes home, but they do it very subtly.
Granted, this is my first viewing, and I'm absolutely seeing it as someone who is here in the United States in 2024. And looking back, the sexism is just, the chauvinism leads towards camp for me. That's where I feel like it's failed seriousness. Although hearing everybody talk about it right now, it doesn't mean that I hate the film. It just means that I'm like, oh, I see certain things that I don't so much agree with. Thinking, Christianne, when you had mentioned of a reading of this that laid over the rise of Margaret Thatcher in the UK, for instance, it made me think of other layers that are here within the story. It's elevating it all for me. I love it. Like the radiation, which is like, okay, goofy radiation, MacGuffin, this is what makes zombies. But what they're doing is, like, I've thought of it before as just progress in general, just kind of harming us and ultimately killing us. But the radiation eliminates our predators. It eliminates the natural predators that are in the ground. So in a way, that can be, by eliminating our predators, it's making us soft. And a reaction towards, oh, this is making us soft, can be a hardline turn towards Thatcherism, towards fascism, towards more rigid gender roles. And it's making me like this more. You guys, you're doing it.
There's a line at the end of the movie where one of the scientists says, "We're going to have a hell of an apple crop this year," and I immediately said, "No, you're fucking not. You're killing all the bees. No, who's going to pollinate your damn crops?"
The science, the confidence of those giving the truck, that emits this sound and doing the activities. I mean, it's just too kind of like, they don't seem like they invented the thing. They just seem like two guys from Terry Gilliam's Brazil trying to fix the pipes. I mean, they don't seem like they're really the brightest people there. And they don't recognize what they're doing could have an effect. I mean, I do two things about the film's intelligence I will love and question. One, they do put two and two together. The machine is causing the bodies. But only half the town can easily recognize that. The other half is like, oh, that's crazy. And it's not, because it's the only new element introduction into this town. Like, clearly they should investigate this, or at least stop the sound for a little bit. And it seems very obvious. But then again, it seems very obvious that FEMA's not directing funds to migrants. You just want Google and you're like, okay, yeah, that's not real true. And people still like get wrapped in the rabbit hole of that. So this is showing, just like George Romero did, humankind will have a very hard time surviving when half of us are morons, and then, not to be a political half or anything. It could be, a portion of each community has the inability to recognize this is truth and this is propaganda, or this is misinformation and this is incomplete information. And it feels like this town is the same way. There's a conservative lean, there's a liberal lean. They're not talking to each other. They both got slightly different pieces of information. They all kind of want to help and they do want to solve it, but they've got their own trenches they're just dug in.
Well, that's just it, that they all have their priorities. What's a few zombies here and there if I can actually turn a profit, with my crops this year? If I can do better than the guy down the road, then it's worth it. You're going to have some collateral damage.
I'm reminded of that cartoon that has like three people sitting around a campfire in the ruins of the world, and one of them is saying, "Yeah, I know it sucks, but for one glorious quarter, we created so much money for our shareholders."
Yeah, right. It's along those lines where it's like, it isn't. It harks back to Jurassic Park. It's like we don't question whether we should do something or not. We're so invested in whether we can do this. Will this actually have the result that I'm looking for? And I don't care about the consequences yet because I don't know about them. And I may not care about them once I do know about them.
Yeah, and the science guys are so arrogant in this film. They are not humble at all before the natural world. And that is just, I mean, I see that in people, well, certain billionaires in the body politic right now. I thought it might have been hyperbolic when I first saw the movie, but then I live in 2024 and it's not hyperbolic at all. If anything, it soft pedals things.
Yeah, in England and Spain under Franco, and they were probably already aware of some of these trends and knew that they could ride a line a little bit in a teachable moment without getting thrown in jail themselves, and they could disguise it as a zombie film a little bit in the same way George Romero could decide, sort of hide different elements, or Invasion of the Body Snatchers could hide different elements within the story of genre filmmaking and say, oh, it's a space capsule. What are you talking about? It's not communism or whatever. Yeah. But not that they intentionally did that, but that kind of stuff is amazing. I do wonder, though, they have got a great story point there. This machine, with its range of sound, causes lower developed nervous systems, the recently dead and babies, to come back violent. What the hell is the second thing about the touching the eyeballs with the blood of the living?
Well, that's just it. It mixes the mysticism with the sci-fi, which I love.
That's cool, but it doesn't make any freaking sense.
No, it doesn't. No.
How did the first guy come alive if he didn't have the blood of the living to do the blood to the other people? It doesn't make any sense.
This one goes to 11.
Oh, okay.
Well, okay. So our first guy has been recently buried, right? And the machine,
he hasn't been buried. He hasn't been buried yet. His coffin is sitting in that crypt.
That's right. He hasn't even been buried. He's activated.
But even how he does it is ridiculous. So he takes the blood of somebody one of the zombies have killed, just a drop of it, and he places it on the two eyelids closed. How's that getting in to the zombie? Like, your eyelid's not porous. Like, the whole mechanics of it feels very like Hammer horror or something. But
I mean, I don't think it's any sillier than Brendan Gleeson becoming a zombie and 28 days later just having one drop of blood fall into his eye. I mean, that's sort of the same thing. I guess you can write it off as a pathogen.
It always bugs me. I love Dawn of the Dead. It's one of my top 5 films. But when Roger gets blood in his mouth, I'm like, he's gone now. Pre-leg bite, he's fucked now. But like, people don't mind being just soaked in infected blood in that movie. So it seems very, very strange.
For me, and granted, I haven't seen a lot of these films, but before Night of the Living Dead, zombie films were the Haitian zombie films. Right. And so that's just what popped into my head when I saw them doing that. It was almost like a ritualistic thing as opposed to a bite or something with a biological explanation. It was almost like they were pre-programmed to know, this is the thing that I do. I with my fingers, I rub the blood on them and poof, they come to life. It was almost felt like black magic to me rather than something that had a scientific explanation.
But I just don't know why they needed it.
I agree. There's something that's very I Walked with a Zombie or White Zombie about, like the ritualistic way to kind of bring that in, which you fold that into like the conservative leanings of a conservative read of this. It is this xenophobic type of layer to kind of add into there. Yeah, no, I was just thinking like the blood that they're using, it's the blood of the victim that they used to do this. So not a blood of a victim who's probably going to come back. But they wouldn't even be infected blood like 28 days later, once you get into the eye. It's just
it's the ritual.
It's clean blood. Yeah. It's just magic.
Since we're talking about a plot point here, like maybe a continuity flaw or the merge of two scripts with two different ideas about how to bring the dead back. I don't know what the origin story of that is, but that one thing bugs me. But the other thing that bugs me is in the siege at the crematorium church, which we can talk about in more depth because that is a fantastic scene as well. Yep. But let me set this up. They did a thing where they're like, hey, how are we going to get our photos developed in this small town? And they said, oh, he does the lab work himself here. He's an ex-photographer or whatever. Okay, that is a writer saying, hey, man, nobody can develop film in a tiny town within 2 hours. So how do we explain this away as a screenwriter? They fixed it. It's fine. They were smart enough to see that's not right. Okay, one line of dialogue. We're all good to go. Who then shuts the frickin' gate when they're in the basement and they're like, hey, we're in here. I have never been able to figure that out because then when Guthrie shows up, the zombie, he's behind them. He's not even coming in through the stairs or anything. Like, who shut the gate on him? It's perplexing to me.
Reminds me a little bit of that scene in Halloween where Sheriff Brackett says he's been institutionalized for 15 years. Where did he learn to drive a car? And Loomis says he was doing pretty good.
Yeah, somebody taught him.
Yeah,
yeah, I love that. That's okay if somebody's just going to throw out a theory, right or wrong, and get you over that believability hump. I'm like, cool. I've done that as a writer myself. 25,000.
They could have covered a lot of sins in this movie with just a little bit of lamp shading, and they just didn't do it.
Yeah. But who closes that freaking door? That's what I want to know. That's a big scene. They get locked in the basement. And who's locking in the basement? They never say. Those other zombies aren't animated yet. They're alone in this church. And the zombie that could have done it is not in anywhere near the location of the grate, nor would he know to do that. He's a freaking zombie. So I never understood that part.
Maybe just
It
a
was one of
strong
those moments
wind.
I just kind of rolled with because kind of like what Aaron said, I just assumed that there was a groundskeeper that just went, oh, look, the door's open and closed it. And he somehow did not get cannibalized and just walked away.
Okay. Now maybe they did a line like that. Oh, the deaf groundskeeper must have done it. Okay. Then I would be like, oh, I wouldn't say a thing, but here I am 50 years later.
Yep.
Irritated by this.
Why couldn't you just said deaf groundskeeper?
That would have been perfect.
It was right there.
Anyway, this, when
let's talk about that siege scene though, because
that is the only Night of the Living Dead-esque scene where you're like, they're trapped in an environment, can't escape, and they're surrounded by zombies. So that is the only, to my mind, aside from the ecological message, having an overarching theme, that is the only thing that's really like, here's Night of the Living Dead for you, fans.
Well, and I really like how dynamic some of the camera work gets at that point where, we're following like these zombies are smart enough to pick up headstones and either, fling them at you or, break down doors with them. Like these are already higher functioning zombies than we've seen in Night of the Living Dead.
There's some strong zombies too.
And they use tools.
Yeah.
They seem to be able to communicate without talking, and they seem to be able to organize an attack. And they're eating people. So I guess like Night of the Living Dead, they eat for food. They're not eating any particular part of the person. They're just kind of just cannibalizing everything, which makes it super violent. I love a good siege.
Well, I think this is a good time to bring up the zombies, which was one of my favorite parts. In fact, it was something they talked about on the DVD where Jorge Grau was talking about the sounds and the appearances of these zombies. And so appearance wise, he was going for, they look like they just walked out of the funeral home. Mm-hmm. So rather than being rotting and having that sort of appearance, they're kind of sturdy. and I think that's kind of like the explanation of why the best explanation anyway for why they can lift a whole tombstone and be superhumans. But also just really quick to digress, the sound was really what got to me of these creatures the first time I saw it, is that, and that's something that Grau commented on in the DVD was, when I heard my father's dying breaths, that's what it sounded like. So I just assumed that if there were zombies, this is what they would sound like. They would sound like they were having their last dying breath. And
that is, I really do. Thanks for mentioning that, Dodd. I love the soundscape of this movie, the mechanical, the atmospheric, the heavy breathing, the screaming. Like it's a really great film to listen to. It's very dynamic, and in the same way that Darren was commenting, it's a really beautiful film to look at. Like this is clearly put together by people who know how to make a movie.
Yeah, and they always have that low-level thrum from the insect machine. Throughout the entire film. I mean, sometimes it's just almost subliminal, but it's always there, and I think it ratchets up the tension nicely.
I really like in the siege, it just gets worse and worse. And that feels very Night of the Living Dead. So it starts off as just exploring the cemetery, and no one seems to be there. And then they find a body of the caretaker, vicar, whatever's there. Then they get shut in, and then the cop arrives, and then he loses his radio, and then they board themselves in. And this is a long sequence. This is maybe 15 minutes of the movie. Then they try to figure out how to fight them within the chamber, and then they try to escape through the tunnel and out into the ground. But then when she gets out into the ground, she's not tall enough to climb out of the pit. I mean, there's just like, it's great. I'm going to say Hollywood. I know it's not Hollywood, but it's great Hollywood ratcheting up the tension something goes wrong every few seconds. The thing they're blocking the door with breaks. The thing, it's just this, then that, then this, then that. It's really like, oh my God, am I at the climax of the movie? And you are not. You are probably at the midpoint of the movie. And I find that really bold, and not only to not fully copy everything that was going on in Night of the Living Dead, but find their own way. But establish how you kill a zombie is done in that scene with the burning. And there's just so much information given to you in a very exciting way, where you're figuring out with the characters what's possible and probable for survival, particularly.
Well, and one of the things with the characters is that we have that, and I don't know that we get as invested in these characters as we could, perhaps, as we do with Night of the Living Dead, for sure. But, the fact that your loved ones could be the one coming for you, like it's her husband coming at her. It is Christine Galbo coming after Ray Lovelock. These zombies seem to have, again, in the way that they are higher functioning, they seem to recognize who you are, and they want to eat you, like there's no reticence on their part.
No, there's no love.
And if we look at the second siege sequence at the hospital, I mean, that's where things really ramp up, because we get our big gore set piece with the nurse being torn apart.
Yeah. Let me just declare, I absolutely love hospitals for horror films. And it's probably because I'm personally scared of any time I have to go to the hospital. Not that I've gone there for anything significant, but when you're in a hospital environment, it does feel like a liminal space. And it's not a territory that a non-medical professional is that familiar with. And there's a lot of unknown down the trail. You don't exactly know what whether it's putting on a gown where they can see your ass, or whether it's putting a needle in you, or whether it's full on brain surgery. There's so many possibilities that could go right or wrong. Just the environs of a hospital. Now, when I think of a hospital, I think of Halloween 2 and long hallways, and an American hospital. This is almost like a haunted castle. And the first introduction shot of that hospital is so gorgeous, and they hang on it for a long time and then pivot very slowly with the soundtrack, the zoom, 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 zoom. The shot goes on forever. You're like, where is the camera going? It's like pivoting away from the hospital, but where it goes is to the trucks that carry the dead bodies. And the workers there. And I think it's such a great shot, because it basically says, you think you're here because it's a place of healing. No, it's where more dead people are. And they really take their time with that dolly shot. And it's a great payoff. Again, another reason in the There Will Be Blood metaphor why this film feels better made, because they were like, we need to establish the hospital is not a safe space. It's a place of danger. How do we do it? One dolly shot. They got it done. And I love that. But yeah, the fact that it's a European hospital with stairs and creaky elevators and, stone and small rooms and small staff, it's just quite frightening before anything happens, like the baby.
Well, and the heart surgery zombie always freaked me out. The guy with the head bandage and the big incision on his chest, that was a wonderful touch, I thought, in the hospital setting.
And there's, where they attack the mortuary guy first. You see the leap, and you come back and he's just dismembered all over the room. Yeah. It's like, wow, that was real. They really did it.
Well, he learned how to use that tool once again. The hatchet comes in pretty handy. I do want to kind of just mention, I think you brought it up, Darren, the idea of the Tombs of the Blind Dead movies predated this one. They are kind of like the connective tissue between Night of the Living Dead and this film, because we saw
all four of them, right? All four came out before.
I think that's right. I think Night of the Seagulls or Ghost Galleon, whatever the fourth one is. I think that's 75. But we certainly had the first one and second one in the early 70s prior to this film coming out. It was a Spanish zombie, such as it was. But it was, again, a very specific type of zombie. It was the Knights Templar, and they looked very different. They didn't look like us. Whereas, to your point, Dodd, I mean, these zombies, they look like us. What do we see the relationship between Night of the Living Dead and Tombs of the Blind Dead?
Yeah. Have any of you seen one or all four of the Blind Dead movies? Also referenced in these books quite extensively, the horror zombies, zombie movies, and Book of the Dead.
Yeah. Well, Tombs of the Blind Dead, I think we mentioned in Hidden Horror as well. But yeah,
Tombs of the Blind Dead has a similar incomprehensible plot, by the way.
Yes, an amazing soundscape that kind of smooths things over in terms of what our narrative logic has to do.
Do you all feel this has a convoluted plot? I feel it's got a plot with some cul-de-sacs. I'm not quite sure what all the cul-de-sacs mean, but I do believe it's got a thoroughly
like this one's
understandable story.
Yeah, I think it's a particularly linear plot. I think it has to cheat a little bit to actually get from point A to point B, but it has an awareness of where point A and point B are, which I can't necessarily say about a lot of European horror movies from this period of time because they were being made up as they went. This seems like it had a screenplay.
Yeah,
that was written before they started filming, unlike say Mario Bava going out with like 2 pages every day.
I agree. I feel like because there's things they could, if they had not figured out ahead of time, wouldn't work. Like him not having the car keys when they decide to split up, and he goes and that's a screenwriting thing because he can't have a car for the next 30-minute sequence. So how do you get rid of the car? Oh, the other person left with his car keys. And so now he's on foot, and just little things like that. They had to map that out.
Yeah, it's planned. It's too well directed to be sort of improvised. There was a shot in the early part of the film when Cristina Galbo is getting gas right before she runs over his motorcycle, and that shot starts at the gas tank and then just sort of pans over and then comes back to the main. And another director might have cut on that.
I agree. Yeah, there's lots of little moments like that where they maybe didn't want to run over a real motorcycle, so they're kind of cheating a little bit. Right. But at the same time, the way they chose to do it was artistically sound and not just a cheat. I do agree, though, that the Blind Dead movies are all over the plot map. They are really like they
blind.
Do
how could they see?
They don't even work as
how can they follow a plot?
Yeah. I mean, I fucking love all 4 Blind Dead movies, even the Ghost Galleon, the third one, which is definitely the weakest.
Yeah.
One thing I don't like about the Blind Dead movies, which is not present here, at least, I don't think it's present here. You guys can debate me on this, which is all the rape in the Blind Dead movies feels very male gaze, very awful. Luckily, it's a small portion of it, with the exception of the Ghost Galleon, where I think it just goes on way too long. And it's not profane or anything. It has a right to be in there in terms of where they're going at that time of history and the type of movie they're making. I'm not going to put a big judgment on the group. They don't go that far, but clearly, just like Clint Eastwood with all the movies he had Sandra Lock attacked by men on, clearly there's a thing there in the mind of Armando Desorio where he thinks that's cinematically interesting and not.
Yeah, there's a level of homophobia in the first Blind Dead movie too that's really kind of unpleasant. I mean, and this film indulges in a certain amount of homophobia too, but the difference is who it puts that homophobia, whose mouth that they put it into. They put it into the inspector.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who we don't like. So
who is an absolute rat bastard.
Yeah. No disagreement there. Yeah. It's just, he's like, the sheriff of Western towns going around saying the N-word and just being a total oblivious douchebag. And he doesn't really have any redeeming moments unless, like I said, he does seem to actually somewhat be investigating the more logical things of the case, completely ignoring the real truth, the more illogical things. But I don't, maybe another cop would be the same way, even if they weren't a pig. But I don't feel like in this movie that the movie hates Christine Galbo or hates the sister, the drug addict sister. I don't feel like there's like a hatred towards women in this. I don't really 100% feel that, particularly in the 4th Blind Dead movie, which does have a lot of female heroes in it. But it's definitely, there's something there that's not here.
And when you talk about the Christine Galbo character, I mean, that I feel like she's very much an avatar for Barbara in Night of the Living Dead, in that she isn't a capable heroine. She needs someone to help her along. She is there to look pretty and to scream loud.
Well, she gets pretty racked with indecision towards the end of the movie, which doesn't serve her at all.
Right.
Well, I mean, at the end of the movie, she's been sort of driven insane. I mean, when they go back to the gas station to pick her up, I mean, she's gone because
They kicked
she's
her
gone
out.
completely berserk.
Feel free to debate me on this because I might be blind to it, but I feel like I wouldn't show the 4 Blind Dead movies to a certain audience. But I feel like this one, unless they had a real problem with the violence, which I don't think there's anything cruel about the violence, like in the way like Schindler's List or something that would really bother you. I do think it's a bit cartoony, over the top splatter violence, which granted could be sickening to some people, could be outrageous. But I don't think there's anything mean spirited in Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. I do feel there's a little hint of that in all 4 of the Blind Dead movies.
Agreed.
As an example of equity in the movie, because I frequently get sometimes when the violence towards the female characters is a little too explicit, you're kind of like, is this just mean? Like, I forget which Saw movie that was, where all of the women were tortured, and the one guy who died just quickly got his neck broken and he's done. But all the women were vicious. I was like, this seems like, and it was about a breakup. I forget which Saw movie that was. But it was like, I think the director just went through a bad breakup, is kind of the vibe you get. And you're like, this is not great. And I was curious about that when in the hospital scene, the secretary, the person at the phone, when she loses a boob. Yep. But then later on we have the guy, he loses a boob. So I'm like, okay, I see you. Your heart's in the right place. I see you trying for equity.
Well, and I think that is one of those showstopper moments. I think Jorge Grau was like, let's go big with this one. Let's have something get shredded. Let's have, entrails torn out. Another moment that I really like that nobody's mentioned yet is when Martin is doing his photography of the waterfall, and you have the photos that are flashing, just on their own whilst he's being murdered in front of his wife. I'm like, I just find that scene to be, and I'd forgotten about it because it's not one that lodged in my memory. So on this most recent viewing, that was the one that I went, oh, wow, that is really artistic. That feels like somebody this could be a really great cinematic moment.
It reminds me a little bit of Peeping Tom. When he's photographing, women dying in front of his camera.
I like the idea of the shutters going off. The Halloween 2018, which I think is a terrible, terrible film that no one should see. But the only moment in the film that was halfway worth its salt was the guy crossing the security lights in the backyard, and every time he moved, the security lights came on, and every time he stopped, they went off. And when they're on one time, he sees Michael Myers, and then they go off again. That's the only scene where I was like, somebody thought of something here. Well, Let Sleeping Corpses Lie has tons of great directorial choices that fit the story, that are clever and innovative, and yes, beholden to some films that came before it, but also it's like, I'm not going to do Tombs of the Blind Dead. Yeah, I'm going to do my own thing. Considering, that really the genesis for this was to do Night of the Living Dead, there are elements of it. Like, the fate of Ray Lovelock's character being shot by the police. He gets to come back in a way that Ben does not.
Spoiler alert.
Well, it's a zombie movie.
For which one?
That's a great ending, though. I love that. Do you guys like that ending?
I think I would have liked it if it had stopped when Ray Lovelock's character gets shot through the head. Because George showing up in the inspector's apartment at the end of the movie. Again, spoiler alert.
If you're an hour into this show already,
it makes me really. I mean, it raises too many questions about like, how did he get there? How did he know which room he was going to? And
it does hold grudges too. But...
Yeah, and I get that it's supposed to be sort of like a certain amount of poetic justice on this absolutely awful character that we all want to see die. I think it would be more effective if he lives and is overseeing the world after the zombies.
Sure. As a commentary.
The way that it ends like an EC comic book.
That's exactly what I thought. I'm like, it was an EC comic, gimme.
Is that good or bad, though, Aaron?
I enjoyed it, so I don't think it's bad. The EC comics don't bother to justify how these things happen. We just go for the great final panel, and that's the satisfaction. For this one, I agree with you, Christian. I think it would have more emotional resonance in the way that Night of the Living Dead does. However, because they've already done that, I think had they done it again, I would have felt like it was more of a copycat. Here, it's a copycat, and then it's a yes and I like that.
I don't know if you guys saw this, but as Kennedy is being murdered, there is a look on his face like, holy shit, I was totally wrong. I think
that guy's dead.
And I think that generation, 1974, post-Vietnam, or whatever was going on in Spain and Italy and England at the time with hippie culture, they were probably like, give it to the man. That was probably a big crowd moment. Probably made him a lot more on the box office, showing the conservative, and I don't mean like politically conservative, just fascistic sort of guy get his just due.
I can't imagine this. That's not why it's there. Is to elicit the cheer from the audience. To we've been scared of the zombies, and now the zombies are on our side, taking down the man.
At the same time, having that be the moment, yes, let's stick it to the man. It wasn't as cathartic as some of those moments had been for me in other instances. And I think it was just because it was a choke. Like if you did something like one final set piece, reach into his chest, pull something up, something that's a little bit more visceral, then you're like, now you stuck it to the man. Otherwise, it's kind of like, oh, okay, you went to sleep.
But this is Arthur Kennedy we're dealing with. That guy ain't going to sit still for a prosthetic fitting.
Correct, which has also made me think of if you stop it just a little bit before, even if it's just the moment of him, and I know this isn't the film we have, and that's fine, but I kept thinking of Sutherland at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That is such a wonderful moment when it's just him just pointing at Veronica Cartwright, just like, and that moment, it's not a makeup set piece, but it is chilling.
Actually, I like that suggestion, Matthew, of having him show up dead and the realization been had without the actual seeing of
the murder itself.
That might have been
my favorite instance of that is the very end of Dial M for Murder, where you have that wonderful shot of Ray Milland's face when he realizes that he's screwed.
Yep. There's that's all the poetic justice we need.
Arthur Kennedy's fate is really anchored to one of the best quotes in the film from him after he kills Ray Lovelock. He says, I wish the dead did come back to life so I could kill you again, you bastard.
Yep.
So, and that just resonated for me because I'm like, well, you're going to get your chance and you're going to lose. So,
yeah, the first time you guys saw this, did you picture that ending? You're like, oh, I know where this is going?
I did not see that coming.
I thought the villagers would see the truth. The first time I saw the film, I thought maybe there would be some type of a happy ending, or somebody would eventually witness these zombies, and at least they'd get the Arthur Kennedy character on their side. But no.
Yeah,
I kept hoping someone would pick up the phone and call someone.
Well, the doctor gets closest. The doctor's like, I could bring someone in, but we don't have enough evidence yet. When you think about it, that might be true, though. This whole thing takes place in like 48 hours.
Yeah, like figuring it out it's a lot of guesswork, and the people who have figured it out are on the run. Dodd, before we wrap things up, basically the way the Hidden Horror Project went, and 3 of the 4 of you contributed to that, was that I put it out to people. I said, what are some movies that you think don't get enough love or deserve to be highlighted? What made you choose this film?
I think it was because, as one book put it, I had to look at the title again to remember, Book of the Dead. I think this is kind of the way I would phrase it too. I saw it as this fascinating movie that bridged the gap between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. It just always seemed to me like when I was kind of interested in that horror movie fan circle, people always kind of referred to Dawn of the Dead as that first splattery zombie movie that came out. And I think that the reason I wanted to recognize this film was that, no, wait, there was this one first. And it actually kind of had a lot of elements that were very similar to Dawn of the Dead, and it came out before Dawn of the Dead. So I think that's really the big thing that really hooked me and made me think this is an underrated movie that a lot of people don't know about, and I'd like to make them more aware of it.
Does anyone know if George Romero saw this movie?
I've never heard him talk about it in interviews or anything.
Just curious.
Final thoughts, Matthew. I'm going to save you for last because I want to hear what your final thoughts are post panel. Christiana.
I think it's an important film. It's really the first real inheritor of the Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead series from Europe. It deserves more attention.
I think what I said before kind of wraps it up, caps up my thoughts on it. I think it's a great film that needs more attention.
I think it needs to be known by one particular title instead of the constellation of titles that it goes by, though. That would help.
That's half the fun. Darren?
I am excited about this movie every time I see it. I love it. I think it is one of the top 10 zombie films ever made. And I do think it's forward thinking in a lot of ways. We hadn't really talked that much about the violence here. It is extraordinarily violent in a way that I think even somebody who might enjoy the rest of the story might be put off. And yet they didn't hold back from it at all. It is very much like The Beyond or some later Fulci stuff where it really gets into the gross factor. Yet me, a guy who's not that show up gore for gore's sake, I think it's still quite entertaining, which is a weird thing. How can you get a movie where basically everybody dies, things go horribly wrong, there's plenty of blood and splatter, and you still say good plot, good cameras, good music? We didn't talk about the score. Very underrated, very good ambient atonal score. There's so many things about it that are so strong that it is kind of joyous to see these people fully invested in this, even with, like I said, some strange dubbing. I've never loved Ray Lovelock's voice that much in the movie. He sounds very whiny. But it for me, every time plays as a quality 70s horror film with zombies. And there's just not that many of them. So
yeah, that's true.
I put it really, really up there. If you've never seen it, even though we've probably blown a lot of the ideas here as we're talking through it, it's still got surprises. There's many things we didn't talk about. It's worth a visit and a revisit if you haven't seen it lately.
And Matthew.
So as we've been talking about this, I before I logged in here, I thought this was a one-time watch. I would just kind of write it off. As we've been talking about it here during this hour, I do have to say that the inspector is absolutely a villain that you love to hate. And to have this done wholeheartedly by an actor in their later career and have it done so well, it's much less like, say, Janet Leigh in Night of the Lepus, and much more like, honestly, maybe Joan Crawford in Trog. Like, this is much more like someone actually trying, and you see that. I have to say, I cannot wait to rewatch this now. So thanks, because there are other angles that I think that I wasn't in that frame of mind to kind of observe, and I'm really down to watch this again. So thank you, everybody. This was not the experience I thought it was going to be this hour.
Honestly, I was surprised that you'd signed up, because I was like, oh, I wouldn't have thought this was, as much on your radar as some of the other titles we've had you on for.
And you were right.
And I was like, well, that's cool. But I think it's great that you stepped in not knowing. And I'm glad that we had to be able to have a conversation around it, because that's what we're here for. Thank you all so much. This was a delightful conversation, and looking forward to having another one with all of you very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scale.